right, well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Watershed Talks. I'm Pastor Joseph.
And I'm Pastor Tim.
And we have with us, is it Reverend Dave, Pastor David? What do we like to go by?
Well, I can't tell you what some people call me. It's PG-13, but David will be fine.
David will be fine. All right. So we have David Lyons with us, who is the director, I believe is the title.
Director of Atlas of Spencer.
Of Atlas of Spencer, which currently is... It is a houseless organization that helps those who need homes and in between those kind of places, right?
So primarily Atlas is three things. Number one, help hurting people. Number two, equip the church to reach them. Number three, unite the community in those endeavors. Help hurting people, equip the church, unite the community. And so we were based in South Grand prior to the flood. A couple churches have graciously opened up to us since then. Beginning of this last month, we were able to rent an office downtown, so my staff will have a place to operate out of. And main reason I wanted that was the cold time of year. We have a lot of people that housing insecure or homeless. They do walk in. So I wanted the physical location. So we're located at 13 West 4th Street.
Yeah.
Just downtown from a hen house and the bridal shop and meddler and all that. So.
All right. Nice. Yeah, I think there's some jokes to be made about the organization in town that helps those looking for a home not having their own home. Yeah. But I'm not a good enough comedian to figure out exactly how to word those.
I've heard your jokes and no, you're not.
Anyways, David, how long have you been with Atlas here in town?
So December 7th this year I will have my 7th anniversary. So yeah,
wow.
Right at 7 years.
Congratulations,
Thank
man.
you.
I know some people that y'all have helped. I've heard about stories of many more. So, I know myself, I'm very grateful we have something like that here in Spencer. Yeah. So let's dig into the text today. If I remember right, we're still in Ruth. We've moved on to Ruth chapter 2, and Pastor Tim, you gave the sermon on it. So where do you want to start? Let's ground ourselves in the scripture. Take it away. Give us the verse. That way people could follow along.
Yeah. I think this one, it would almost be better if we just read through the whole thing so people can hear the story.
All right, get ready to hit ×2 on your speed, people.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay. or plus 30 seconds.
Oh, there you go. Okay,
all right. All right, so it says, at this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? And she's talking to Boaz. Boaz replied, I've told you all about what you have done. I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. Now you've left your father and your mother and your homeland and came to live with a people that you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken refuge. Actually, we can stop there.
Okay.
Because right there, I mean, a lot of the sermon was about noticing the character of Ruth, and that's one of the things that was the most attractive thing about Ruth, I think, because it doesn't really talk about her physical characteristics. We don't know if she's good looking or not, but we know that the character is what really stands out for her appearance.
Yeah, her rep, right? Her street cred.
Yeah, exactly.
As it were.
I have no teenagers. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'll just listen.
You're not from the street, David?
A long time ago.
A long time ago.
Once you learn all their lines, then they change.
That's true.
Yeah, so it's not even worth it.
Nope.
So just to give a quick recap, we went over this, but just really fast. Ruth, of course, is Moabite, which is a different nation. Naomi and her family, her sons, had moved over there, married Moabite women, Ruth being one of them. There was a couple others. Unfortunately, all the men in the family died, and Ruth decides to stay with Naomi and come back to Israel. And, of course, while Ruth is there, she's caught the attention of Boaz, which is where we're picking up the story now.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, what do you take right off the bat here, other than she has some good reputation floating around? What do you think? I keep going back to why. Why does Ruth do this? She follows, something in her tells her to follow Naomi, and then something in her tells her, we keep coming back to that. I'm judgmental, so I guess I'll just own it. But in my mind, if this is today, I tend to see a lot of just hanging out at the house, sitting on the couch, versus this kind of I mean, she's in a nation. It almost would seem reasonable that she doesn't attempt to go out and do this work.
Yeah.
So why do y'all think, like, what is going on inside Ruth that not only to follow Naomi, but even to just go out the door in this strange land and just go after it?
Pastor Tim?
Oh, I'm going to let you go first, Reverend David,
Reverend
Doctor.
Apostolic Doctor, nobody. So I'm going to approach that question a little bit differently. I've been a missionary a number of years, 12 years. First, I lived as a single guy. I was in the Netherlands for 4.5 years, or maybe a little bit longer. And then I was in Peru with my wife for well over 6-7 years. And so I know what it's like to be a foreigner, right? I know what it's like to live in another country. I remember one time in Peru, I needed a washer for the back of her screw or something like that, and I went to the local, I'll use this term loosely, hardware store. They called it a ferreteria. It was basically a garage that people opened up out of their house, and they had different things. And you always would go and ask for something, and then they would disappear for like 45 minutes and come back. So whether or not they got it there or dug it out or went to someone else's ferreteria or whatever. So I remember one time I went to look I needed this washer, and I did not know the Spanish word or the Peruvian slang word for washer, and so I was trying to say it, didn't get it, and so I asked for a piece of paper, and I ended up drawing like a circle with a smaller circle, looked kind of like a two-dimensional donut. So the guy pulls out like a hammer, and then he pulls out a drill. I'm like, I'm not the best artist, but that's a pretty broad leap. It took, I think, about an hour and a half to get a washer, and they used the word, quieres una wacha instead of washer. And so just the frustrating things like that. I remember another time when we were in the Netherlands, one of my friends, we went to a restaurant, and he wanted cheese on his sandwich. And, of course, they speak English fairly well in the Netherlands. And he's like, can you put cheese on that? And the guy's like, I'm sorry, that is impossible. It's impossible to put cheese? That is impossible. He goes, I can see the cheese and I can see the sandwich. Can you not? No, it is not. It is not possible. It is impossible. Like, they went round and around for about half an hour before they finally gave up. The menu did not say cheese, so it wasn't going to happen.
Gotcha.
So sometimes as a foreigner, things are just so frustrating that you just throw up your hands and you quit. You're like, it's not worth it.
Right.
So it's interesting to me, and then what happens a lot of times, you have missionaries or you have expats that move overseas and they're really gung-ho, and they're going to run with it, and they're going to do the best they can. They're like, I'm going to take the bull by the horns, I'm going to go out, I'm going to just make something happen, I'm not just going to sit.
Yeah.
And then what does happen is apathy sets in, culture shock sets in. You get there, and it's just like, when things are so overwhelming and you can't figure out how to make something work, or you don't know where to go, you don't know how to pay your phone bill, you don't know how to pay your electric bill. Sometimes it's just overwhelming. And the simplest things become majorly difficult. So I can see from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually what I was kind of coming from, is like, I don't even think I'd be very actually judgmental of Ruth if she did just like kind of wait at home for a while.
Oh yeah,
because of everything you're describing. I hadn't thought of the term culture shock, but I get that's a real thing. I had a mild case of it when I moved here, and I haven't had barbecue in 4 years. That's not quite as bad. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I could actually be very understanding of her just sort of waiting. But for her to just something in her. So, what then do you think? And we're definitely just kind of theorizing here, but based on your read, or you, Pastor Tim, what do you think is in Ruth that pulls her along to do something like this?
So, I mean, it's in the canon, so maybe playing the God card here a little bit.
Okay.
I forget the other daughter-in-law. Was it Orpha? Was that her name? I always want to say Oprah.
It is
too.
Oprah, actually.
I think it was.
Okay.
I think it was Oprah. She went to Chicago.
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, Oprah's from Mississippi. But anyway, so Orpha goes back. But there was something. What was the dividing line, so to speak, for Ruth? It was, I've seen even we don't get, at least from the early chapters of Ruth, there's not that long, but we don't get a great picture of the mother-in-law, Naomi, right? She goes from Naomi, her name means blessed tomorrow, which is bitter, right? She's kind of talking about the mother-in-law joke. She's this bitter old woman who's experienced life and stuff like that. We don't get a great picture of her, but there's still something that maybe she saw before, or maybe she saw in her husband or her brother-in-law or her father-in-law. There's something because Naomi was the foreigner at first, right? And the brothers and the husbands were the foreigners at first. But there's something in them, and this is speculation, but no, your people will be my people and your God will be my God. There's something distinguishing enough about them. So Moses prayed in Exodus 32 or 33. Remember, he said he's hiding there, and he says, the Lord says, I'm going to send my angel before you, but I'm not going to go with you. And then Moses prays. He says something to the extent of, then all the nations will laugh. They'll say you were able to bring us up out of Egypt, but you weren't powerful enough to bring us into the promised land. And if you don't go with this, what else will distinguish us from all the other people on the face of the earth? And then God responds and replies, my presence will go with you and I'll give you rest.
So why all those verses come into your mind right now? Bring it home for us.
Because there's something, Moses specifically says, these are your people. These are your covenant people. You've made promises. You're faithful. You don't renege on your promises. You're not going to promise one thing and not bring it to pass. And the very thing that distinguishes us from everyone else on the face of the earth is your presence is with us. And so again, going back to Ruth's speculation, there was something that was distinguishable enough to where Ruth says, no, your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. There's got to be something different.
Yeah.
You don't just leave your homeland, even in famine. We have hurricanes coming down right now. People don't leave. I grew up on the coast where they have hurricane parties, and people say, "Why do they stay? Why do they stay?"
They do. Yeah.
You don't leave your home, typically speaking. But there's something in the people of God and God Himself, Yahweh, that caused Ruth to say, "Man, there's something different. I want that." From my perspective.
And it's funny though, because Naomi actually left Israel because of the famine. It was Elimelech, fun name, and then she stayed there for 10 years. So it's was she a good Israelite person throughout all that? Was she kind of a light when everybody was, sacrificing babies to Chemosh? Is that how you say it? Chemosh?
Sounds good.
We'll say it.
Chemish.
Yeah, Chemish, yeah. And the one other kind of dynamic is back in that time, the matriarchy was really, really powerful, and so there was men would follow their fathers and women would follow their mothers. And so, one part of it, when you go to Ruth chapter 1, Naomi is basically begging them, go. There's nothing here for you. And they're like, no, we want to stay with you. And you kind of, if you read into it a little bit, it's like, okay, so are they saying that because they have to say that because the matriarchy demands that, no, we're going to be with you? And then Naomi's like, no, really, just go.
Yeah, of course.
And then Orpha's like, okay, see you later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing I like to highlight is this. It's easy from our vantage point to sort of size up the story and the characters, and Orpah was, we could label her whatever we want to label her.
She was actually smart.
In reality, she was the logical, rational one.
Exactly.
She was, by all measures of I don't know, scientific or just reason at the time.
Yeah.
She was making a reasonable decision.
Yeah.
Ruth was not.
She wasn't.
And something in her caused her to make that choice, and I like to hone in on that. I mean, I don't think we can ever. Did you have a definitive answer on that?
The closest thing that I can get is, one is loyalty. The second thing is what you said, David. I think there's something that stands out about Naomi that there's something here that draws me in, and I want to worship the God that you worship. But otherwise,
there's some attraction. There's
there's
some
something.
spirit being pulled. We would today probably relate it to the Holy Spirit, an energy, a sense,
a gut feeling,
a gut
intuition.
feeling. Yep, something there. If I can, did you have any
Oh,
more?
no, you're good.
Okay, so I wanted to draw our attention to verse 12. One of the things, depending on your translation, Boaz says something along the lines of, "The Lord repay you for what you have done." He's talking about the work she has done, right? And one of the interesting things to me in our history of our faith is that that idea of doing works has been quite the debated topic. The church taught that the work you did literally kind of went into almost a bank or a set of scales or whatever you want to call it. If you're watch the show The Good Place, a point system, and that you were earning God's grace, you were earning God's forgiveness, right? And it's quite debated. And interesting, if you look at commentaries on Ruth from the Reformation, which is right around 1530 and on, almost every commentary that you can find will have in there guys that are hotly debating that Boaz asking for her to be repaid for her work does not mean that we earn grace from God based on our works. In fact, there's a guy, Arthur Jackson, he in part of his on this verse, he says, this has, in bold, no suggestion of blessing for works. I don't know how they did bold back then by hand. I don't know if you wrote it really hard, but, it's quite the debated topic. And how do you work out that we want to make these good choices and we do believe blessings come from it? I mean, do y'all believe that? Or maybe we should start there. When we do the right things, when we follow God's call to follow Naomi to a new land and get up and go work hard for the day after day, do we believe blessings come from that?
Yes and no, maybe.
Okay. Yes and no, maybe. David, how about you? Let's do a poll.
I've got yes and no, maybe. I've got a whole litany of things, but I'm going to wait to this kind of taper off.
Jump in.
So to answer your question, I think it's a little bit of eisegesis. The question you're asking, I don't think.
Define that term.
Okay, so exegesis is reading out of the exit, out, taking out of the text what it says, what it means, how to apply it. Eisegesis is reading into the text something. So to ask a question on the doctrine of salvation by works or grace, which if I understand you right, that's kind of what you're asking. I think that's reading that into the text.
I find it interesting that there's so much, if you research historical commentaries, you see this huge swing in the 15 to 1700s where the commentaries on Ruth are really talking about that, and I just find that interesting.
But I don't think the gospel is even mentioned here. I don't think it has anything to do with the gospel.
Okay.
So the way I'll read it is, so there's a phrase, you guys probably know it, I'm not a German scholar, but Heilgeschichte.
Oh, yeah, I talk about that all the time.
So holy history, salvation history. So, maybe you guys who listen to Pastor Tim regularly, are you being sarcastic?
Yeah. No.
Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay.
It's
so
great.
Heilgeschichte, holy history, salvation history. The idea, and it's different in other languages, but the idea of holy history is history as, quote, his story. History as God's story. And so the idea would be is starting in creation, Adam and Eve, and obviously the fall, of God working through a people to bring about his desired end. And if you read, sometimes if you read these books, especially the Old Testament books, it's hard to see the thread that weaves through all of them together. For anyone out there who's ever kind of read the lectionary, I've preached at churches that use a lectionary, and I'm like, how in the heck did they decide these 3 or 4 things to fit together?
A lot of debate.
So the thread is, what is the thread working through? Obviously with the fall, we have God choosing Abraham, and then a people, the nation of Israel, and then you have obviously you have the time period of the Judges, which is the time period now, and then you go into the Kings, which gets into David. And I don't know if you're going to go from Ruth into the following chapters, but Boaz and Ruth are in the direct lineage of King David. But also one interesting thing is, during the time when David is fleeing, he actually sends his family to the king of Moab. Right. Which later on, there's kind of this reversal there. So I see it as, how is God working? What is the thread connecting these characters, their stories, wrapped up in God's story to bring about his desired end? Right. So I don't think which obviously brings us to a covenant of grace, but I don't think that grace is mentioned here. So I'll go ahead and point out some words that in verse 12, it says, "May the Lord repay you for what you have, quote, done or worked." And then he says, "May you be richly rewarded by the Lord," which is your question. But if you keep reading after that, it says, "The God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." So she's already taking refuge under God's wings, so to speak, using that analogy. So it's not like her works are bringing her into God's kingdom, right?
Right.
She's already part of the covenant people of God, that going back to my point originally. No, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. She already is, in theory and in reality, in that covenant. going back to the Pauline versus the James debate of salvation by
Right.
by faith alone, grace alone, or works. James says, I'll show you my faith by my works. Right. So I don't
Yeah.
think it is salvific by any means. I think to read salvific meaning bringing salvation. I think to read that is reading into the text. Now, to your broader question, are we blessed by in a static world where variables don't change? Yes, right. But that was Job's friends. That was their theology. You do good, you're blessed. You do bad, you're judged.
But see, here's the thing, and this is why I'm honing in on this. I think that whether we admit it or not, or even are conscious of it or not, that's like a default code in our minds. We go about teaching, and why wouldn't we? Kind of like the reasonable choice that Oprah made. Not Oprah, Orpha. There you go. You got me. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the reason to do good things, the reason to go about making these choices that we believe are good Christian choices, or even just good moral, ethical choices, is whether we realize it or not, what we communicate is it's because of what we get out of it. We will have a better life if we live a better way.
Well, and that goes back to the fallen nature of humanity. I mean, what we do is oftentimes, what do I get out of it? And so when we read into it like, I'm going to do all these good things because if I do these good things, then God will richly bless me for what I'm doing. I don't think Ruth was getting at that. I think she was like, I'm loyal to Naomi. I want to do what I feel is right. And you see this character component that I keep coming back to. But you're right. Most people, it's like, okay, if I go volunteer at the food shelter, or if I like give somebody money, God's going to bless me for that. Well, you're going to be blessed because that's how God made you. I mean, you were made to give and to serve. And so you're going to feel like, okay, this is my natural state of being. Is that a blessing that God gives
That's
you?
a good point.
I mean,
I like where you're going with that.
It's not like God saying, okay, well, now that you've done this, then you're going to have a great year. I mean, God causes the rain to fall on the good and the evil. You look at somebody who is just a terrible human being, and they have a blessed life. Well, does that mean that what they're doing equates to God's blessing?
But the thing is, culturally,
yeah.
we do tend to, the word would be sanctify. We do tend to wipe away any evil that they've done, or wickedness, or just downright, cringy things. We tend to ignore that or put it over here in a box if they are successful, and then we will, whether we're conscious of it or not, we'll tend to treat that kind of success, usually with money, but there's also fame and things like that, as a way of not justifying, but definitely sort of wiping away all the stuff that they might have done to get there.
Can I actually hijack your
yes, you can.
I have a question.
I'm going to get back to it, though. I had but go ahead, because I felt like I cut you off anyways.
No, you're fine. So I want to go back to, because I wasn't here Sunday, but I think you talked about relationships, if I'm understanding that
Correct.
Right. So I'm going to hijack this back to doing good works for your spouse and or partner.
That's where I was going.
In order to get a desired result, which in some circles is called manipulation.
Oh, yes.
I was meeting with a gentleman recently within the last 5 years, just to not give him away. And he asked me the question. He's older than me, much smarter than me on some things, but he asked the question, well, should I start initiating, he didn't use this terminology, but speaking my wife's love language, or should I wait for her to do it? And I, most of the time I listen, but he said, I want you to give me a black and white answer. And I said, this guy's really good with finances. And I said, so, do you make investments when the stock market's going down? Do you make consistent stock market investments? He said, yeah. I said, well, why do you do that? Why don't you do it when it's only going up? The thing is he's making investments, whether or not the stock market goes up or down, because historically the stock market has always yielded, a good return on investment. And so I said, so you're not moved by necessarily the financial swings up and down. You know that you need to be consistent. You know that you need to be making those deposits. You need to be doing these things. I said, why would you expect your wife to be any different? right? Every relationship has ebbs and flows. Every relationship has
Right.
good times, quote, bad times, ups and downs, stock market swings, so to speak. And I said, you don't stop making those deposits. You know, you're not waiting
Yeah.
for someone else to make it. So point being is, why in the heck are you waiting for her? You know, how selfish are you? You know, make those deposits, and there is no guarantee that you're going to get a return on your investment. The stock market could crash tomorrow, right? You know, but you still, in good faith, so to speak, and you look at the history and you just hope that it'll continue. Well, and in his marriage, I was like, John's not his name. I said, John, you know, don't wait. Make those investments. Whether or not, you know, anyone, quote, sees your good works and rewards you for it, right? You know, because if you're doing something just so that you can have intimacy in the bedroom, well, she'll see through that pretty quickly.
yeah.
So I'll stop there, but I'm going to
No,
hijack
well,
it back to the,
Can I piggyback on that? So the concept that you're talking about is dollar cost averaging,
okay.
which is basically like no matter what, you do an automatic, investment, good time, bad time, and typically that's the way you succeed in the financial markets. But if you think about that in terms of relationships, it's every single day you're going to do something, and it might not be a big thing, but it's every single day you put in just a little bit of effort, and over time it compounds, and that's a way to a successful, healthy marriage, I think.
Yeah, so I like my quotes. So this is from a Reformation theologian who actually, for a time, he left all what we would call ministry work, and he became a glass blower, which I think is one of the coolest jobs ever. Have y'all ever watched those videos?
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh my!
They used to have one here. Prior to both your times coming, there was one in the old post office called Bogan Reef Studios. They used to do blue
I would have
glass
loved
here,
to
yeah.
watch that. His name is Martin Borjas, contemporary of Melecton and Jonathan Eck. But anyways, he says in this discussion on Ruth and of course the works and everything, he's talking about the works we do, and he's talking about God's blessings. And so he says God's blessings flow from grace without doubt, and they are adorned with rewards by God's kindness. And then now he switches and he's talking about the works. They would be in conflict with grace if they would be produced in such a way that something in them were owed, as we note in a contract with a hired wage earner. So the key thing there, I would say let's think about this in life with God, and thank you, David, I was absolutely thinking of it in a marriage or in a relationship, or even not just marriage, with our kids. If we are doing things that, let's just call them works, acts of things we do, in such a way that something is owed to us, then we're, according to him, we're already in conflict with that grace. And I would say we're already in conflict. I think that's what you're actually getting at, David, is we're already kind of in conflict with the love in a marriage as well, or in a relationship. If you're sitting back and waiting for the stock market to be on a rise, you're already kind of off. And I do think it's important to note, though, that there are times in some relationships where it's just never being reciprocated with earthly ones.
Sure.
And so there is a time to have a boundary around that. It's not, sometimes Christians, I've noted, have interpreted sort of unconditional love and ongoing forgiveness and this kind of doing works for the other out of just an authentic caring for them, to mean that we're supposed to be a doormat and just walked all over forever.
Correct.
I mean, y'all would agree, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not that far. However, let's just take a husband who is sitting back. I kind of mentioned this last week. He's sitting back and he's frustrated because his wife hasn't surprised him with anything in a while, right? And the guy, I don't know if he was this, but I'm kind of imagining the guy you're talking about. Should I learn her love language, or should I wait till she speaks mine? He's sort of arms crossed in his heart space, right, sitting back. She hasn't surprised me with anything. Well, at the same time, in living memory, he hasn't sent her flowers. And we mentioned that last week. But that's the kind of thing I'm trying to get at is I want to hone in on these choices we make, and why do we make them, and the impact of if we could, depending on the why, has a real impact on what comes next.
Mm-hmm.
If we're making these choices just for the return, just for what we're owed, I mean, have y'all had that in your own relationships? Have you had
Never.
okay,
Never, ever, ever.
where it kind of got to a place, maybe yourself or maybe somebody that you care about, you can tell they're only doing it for the list,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
How does that feel?
Doesn't feel good. I mean, it feels like you're being used as a tool, like you're being manipulated. And what I do know about women is women will see through that. And it's very, very unattractive. But I think men also see through that as well. And, you know, when we see somebody who is, you know, doing something just simply because, you know, have you ever heard that from your spouse? Like, I want just because you're thinking about me.
Yeah.
Or just a simply because, or because whatever. You know, those are the gifts that really make a difference. You know, and I think that's what we see with Ruth. It's like she's not doing it to get anything out of it. I mean,
I don't think she went there looking for a husband.
No.
Personally. I mean, do y'all read it that way? I don't read it
I think
that
she's
way.
trying to survive.
I think she's
Yeah.
trying to survive, and she's working hard.
and doing the best she can
Yeah.
to support Naomi, who's going through a really
Right.
difficult time.
Right.
And that's very attractive. I mean, if you see somebody who's not focused on themselves, they're focused on other people, then, you know, that becomes a very attractive person.
And I think that, I mean, remind me, so did you say 19 years? What was
19 years.
19
Yeah.
years, and how long for y'all?
16.
And I'm at 17. You know, I would just guess that it's common, though, that you do get in that rut of not like genuinely wanting good for the other. I mean, in a general sense, you would say yes, of course.
Mhm.
But in the small moments, in the day to day, you know, just I don't know, what's something that's coming to mind? Just sharing about her day at work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, am I listening because I genuinely want to hear about what she went through and her thoughts and feelings and everything that happened, or am I looking like I'm listening?
Yeah.
So that I, you know, do you get what I'm
Oh
saying?
yeah.
Unfortunately, Calvin and Hobbes comic strip comes to my mind with that when he paints
Ooh.
tennis balls' eyes, so he's listening in class. But
Yeah. You know, John Calvin wrote, I guess maybe I'm trying too hard. Y'all let me know if I'm reaching, but I'm just seeing this parallel between this 2,000-year debate over works and grace in our faith and the kind of thing we're talking about in relationships and marriage and people that we love. I'm just seeing this parallel, so maybe I'm reaching too hard. But, you know, Calvin himself said that the word merit should be removed from Christian vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
He was that against the idea that we do things to earn it. But it seems like we struggle with it because it's like our default place that we fall back to.
You know, there's one thing that I typically think of. You know, when we do things, good works and such, we want somebody to notice us, somebody to recognize. Oh, you know, and oftentimes it's, you know, God, look what I've done. And the problem is you're starting at the wrong place, because when you start to do that, then you're thinking that you're somewhat better than other people. Like, hey, look what I've done. It's so much better than my neighbor. But then you compare yourself to who Christ is. I mean, Christ is without sin, the perfect representation of God in human form. And so when you start comparing yourself with Christ, I mean, everybody's, you know, just we're all sinners. There's no one that is better than one another. And so it's like, okay, well, look at my good works. Well, look at it compared to Christ's good works, you know. And I think that's the viewpoint that I take with it. It's like, yeah, we can do good things and we can experience those blessings because that's part of living an abundant life. But at the same time, we're not doing it just because we think we're going to get something, because compared to Christ, he's already done everything.
Yeah, but the church needs to hold itself culpable for having been a part of teaching this. I mean, the not the only reason, but definitely if you ever read. So Martin Luther is the guy that is credited with starting the Protestant Reformation. He, you know, the story goes, whether we know if it's completely true or not, he wrote out 95. They called it theses, but 95 bullet points. He nails it on the door of the church in his town, and it's this dramatic movie scene, and now we have, you know, Protestantism is starting, even though Luther didn't actually want to do that. most of his, if you've ever read it, issues, most of his grievances were around a thing called indulgences. I'm sure I'm not telling y'all anything you don't know, but indulgences were a teaching and a practice of the church at the time that if that you had a loved one that passed away, and this is where purgatory was kind of created. You know, that they weren't in heaven, but they weren't in hell. They were in the middle, and if you wanted them to go up to heaven, do y'all remember what did you have to do?
You had to put the coin in the box, and as soon as as soon as the coin hit the box, then you're buying merit.
You were buying it. The coin was paying for priestly prayers, and of course their prayers were the only ones that mattered, right, at the time.
And you're buying merits from the saints.
And absolutely. And so who's doing the saving there? Who's doing all the work, really? If you're, the priest would say, well, it's my prayers, but the point is, it wasn't Jesus, right? And I appreciate that you're bringing our focus back to Christ, because I think one way, and the way we usually close this, David, is how do we go about practicing these things we've talked about today? What is a way to actually live this out? And I'll just go ahead and go first this time. I think to practice doing it for Christ is a great way to reorient, because even if I'm doing it, even if I am authentically doing it out of love for my wife, my kids, I'm thinking of the book, David, that you turned me on to, A Severe Mercy. Wonderful book. Definitely recommend reading it. We still need to finish our little book club around it. But I actually gave that to my wife. She read it in like 2 days. She loved it as well. The kind of quick recap, Tim, is that there's a couple that fall in love with each other. Pre-Christ, they're not Christians. They end up becoming Christians. The husband ends up being jealous of the wife's relationship with God. He feels that, almost like a boyfriend is taking her away. The wife ends up spoiler. The wife ends up passing away. Terminal illness. The husband has befriended C.S. Lewis along the way, and they write letters back and forth. And C.S. Lewis, the title of the book comes from a response from Lewis that says, her passing away was a severe mercy. That's the name of the book. It was a severe mercy. And his point was that marriage would have ended in some kind of death, an affair, fizzling out, divorce, one way or another, because y'all had become your own idols. Your love, while very inspirational to people who care about those, being in love and having that kind of passion in life. Yes, exactly. Bohemian utopia. It still was an idol, and it was as unsubstantial as any idol out there, right? And so my whole long-winded point is that for me, a way to practice this is to reorient everything we do around Christ. We're not going to be able to do that perfectly. That's pie in the sky. But there is something inside, I do believe, that sort of shifts in the framework and the compass points differently. Not only when I stop doing it for myself, but Christ said it's gonna look like hating your mother and father, right? Even when you're not doing it for your family, but it's for Christ first. Does that make sense at all?
Yep.
I know that's kind of harder to actually do than say, but I really do think there's a way to pause and center around whatever you're doing being for Christ that can have a real impact on those relationships in your life. All right, David, what would you say? How do we practice what we're talking about?
I'll try to hit 2 points, 2 or 3 points, and tie them all into one. So in the prodigal son story, Luke 15, my favorite story in the Bible. For those of you who don't know the story, a younger son goes to his dad and says, "Hey, I want my share of the inheritance," which basically saying you're dead to me. He goes and wastefully spends it. He comes back. He has a speech planned out. He's going to grovel to his dad. It says, verse 20, while he's just a long way off, his father saw him, filled with compassion, ran to his son, threw his arms around him, kissed him. And he takes care of his younger son. And then picking up in verse 25, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry. He didn't think his brother was worthy of love. which a lot of times happens in our marriages when they don't act the way, or happens in interpersonal relationships, churches, jobs, whatever you might want to call it. Deacon rooms for every church that's deacon possessed.
No, this never happens in church.
Never happens. Right. So we get angry when the person doesn't react or respond or act in the way that we think they should, and therefore we cut off the relationship. It says the older brother becomes angry and refuses to go in. So the father went out and pleaded with him, but he answered his father, "Look, all these years," this is my favorite verse in this story. He answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you." The NIV reads, "I've never disobeyed your orders. I've been obedient. I've been a good Christian, a good Jewish boy, rather.
Right.
And I've been slaving for you. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours," he won't even call him his brother anymore, "who has squandered your property with prostitutes, come home, you killed a fattened calf for him. My son," the father said, "you're always with me, and everything I have is yours." But we had this. So you have this contrast of this older brother. He's broken off relationship with his younger brother, but he's also broken off relationship with the father. He says, "All that I have is yours. I'm always with you." But he refused to go in. The father had to come out to him.
Right.
So all that to say, I'll tie it up into 2 points.
Good observation there.
Is that John Piper, is one of my favorite quotes, the only quote I know from John Piper, but one of my favorite quotes. He says, "The fight of faith is the fight to stay satisfied with God." The fight of faith is the fight to stay satisfied with God.
That's good.
And so on a, quote, theological level, practical level, my spouse, my coworkers, myself included as well, I use the term, we're all black holes. I will never be able to meet all of my wife's needs. Likewise, she'll never be able to meet all of mine. And so what happens is when I put, going back to your point of idolatry, when I put the burden of all of my needs being met by another person, I'm setting them up for failure. And when they don't, then I become bitter. I become Mara. I become angry. I break off relationship. And that's when relationships, you stop talking, they start to break down. But when I look to God as my source, when I look to God as the one who will fill me, when I look to God as the one who meets my needs, when I look to God as my primary source, and I go to him, when I have this fight of faith that stays satisfied with him, if I'm not spending time in prayer, my relationships are going to suffer. If I'm not spending time in the Word, my relationships are going to suffer. If I don't have those, using the analogy of investing again, if I don't make those deposits into the bank, I'll never be able to make withdrawals, right? And so my first point to anyone listening would be, where are you at in your relationship with Christ? Are you spending time with him? Are you daily in the Word? Are you daily praying? Because if not, you're not going to have anything to draw on. And number two, have you cut off relationship? Are you angry? Are you bitter? Are relationships broken? And it comes back to, I will have nothing to give them. I won't have that impetus to, like Ruth, to be a blessing to Naomi. I won't have that power, so to speak, unless I'm drawing on that relationship with Christ. In John 14, John 15 says, "I chose you to bear fruit that would remain. Apart from me, you could do nothing," right? So our source is in him, our strength is in him, our wisdom in him. Ultimately, our love is found. Like if I'm wanting to be loved, if I don't want to feel rejected, ultimately that's found in Christ.
Right. Secure base.
Yeah.
And then once we draw on that, we have something to offer to other people. So that's what I'd say.
Okay. Tim?
So the question again is, how do we practice this?
Let's take it and put it into a practice we could do this week.
Okay. So again, a little bit long, drawn out, but I think it makes it practical. Okay. So as you guys were talking, I was thinking, and sorry, I was kind of doing my own little research over here. So I was just ignoring you. So I'm taking money out of our love bank to give David. I apologize. But I think about the crowns that Scripture talks about, and there are different crowns. 1 Corinthians 9:25, there's the imperishable crown for like discipline, and 2 Timothy 4:8, it's the crown of righteousness. Those who are living a way that is in right standing with God, or at least trying to. James is the crown of life, enduring trials, remaining faithful. Peter is the crown of glory, and Revelation, what we have is the crown of life. But what do all these people do with the crowns that they get? You don't walk around heaven and you have like 6 crowns on your head all the time.
Okay.
You get to heaven, and then you give them back. So it's not something that I'm doing for myself. It's because I want to present these things to God to say, thank you for all the ways that you have blessed me. And then I think about this in terms of relationships, so why is it that you do certain things for your spouse? And maybe you can even do this with the crown. So like one crown could be like the perseverance that you have in marriage. Okay, so yeah, you are a person who no matter what happens, you're going to persevere, you're going to do the right thing. You're going to have faithfulness and integrity. That's another crown that you wear. Enduring trials together. That's another crown that you wear. And you do all these things and you do it for your spouse. And why do you do that? So that way you can give it back. And so it's the idea like you're not doing these things for yourself. And the thing I think that is the most attractive thing that you can ever do for your spouse is to do all these things with nothing wanted in return.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the thing that we see, and that's really what draws Boaz to Ruth. It's like, oh man, she's going out there and she's doing this work. She's getting nothing in return. What kind of person would even do this? Mm-hmm. And he's like, that's a person I want to get to know.
So hit me with a specific way for the husband or whoever's listening, the parent thinking of their child. What's a specific way they can go out and do that this week?
That's the bottom line, because if you can't do this, then
what do you think? What's just one example?
Okay.
One thing.
So Hy-Vee right now, they have these beautiful purple orchids, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife, she's like, man, those are really, really gorgeous. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to put that away in my head. And while she's not, noticing, while she's gone doing whatever she does, I'm going to go out to Hy-Vee and I'm going to buy those orchids. And so I did that yesterday, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, that's so,
yeah.
And
you remembered,
yeah. And it's those little tiny things like, can you go out to lunch, or can you just write them a little note? And it's all these ways that you discipline yourself, and in a way that you're not thinking about yourself, you're putting them before yourself. So
what I'm hearing, just to work backwards, did I cut you off there?
No, you're good.
Just to work backwards, I'm hearing you talk about reorienting towards sort of an authentic for themness, right? And do that with orchids or whatever. In fact, I'm probably going to go buy those orchids. Wait to release this episode. Give it to my wife first.
They're really cool looking. Everybody go out and buy them. They're $20 at Hy-Vee.
Going over to Reverend David today. What I'm hearing from you is what my good old younger years would have heard as a quiet time. Is that what you're saying, or do you have a different spin?
I preached a message one time, I think, at a local church here in town, a 4-letter word called busy. Going back to culture, which is kind of where we started. In this culture today, everyone's busy. Busy. I'm busy. And no offense, but we're all busy, but none of us are effective. None of us are productive. And so whether or not you call it a quiet time, whatever you want to call it, what I will call it is an intentional effort, an intentional desire to reorient yourself to God.
Yeah, which is really what I was saying too. I think yours is good in a way of taking some time to just have alone time with God, with Christ. For me, what I'm tagging on is when you go to buy the flowers, or you go to do the dishes, take a minute and just bring Christ into it, or even a second. Take 2 seconds and bring God into that decision, that action, that choice, the work that you're doing. I think it does make a difference. So, here you go. 3 different ideas on how to practice this. David, thanks for joining us today. Tim, as always, thank you for being here. I think we'll be more on a regular schedule now, and we'll be back next week. And I believe we have Pastor Mark from Living Word joining us. So thanks, everybody. Have a good day.